Hello again. It is now taken as being self-evidently true that some great injustice was committed against people from the Caribbean who arrived here as children in the 1950s and 1960s. Although they had a perfect right to be here, some of them ended up in later years being treated as illegal immigrants, being denied benefits and hospital treatment, and even in some cases being deported. A shocking business. That is at least how the matter has been portrayed in newspapers, and apologies have been delivered to black immigrants from the West Indies. As usual, of course, it is black people who are presented as being at the centre of things and being the hard done by victims of heartless white folk. The true story is a little more complicated than it at first appears. Until the 1971 Immigration Act, citizens from the colonies had British nationality and were entitled to come and live and work in this country in just the same way that British people were able to do. This included not only Jamaicans, of course, but also people from Cyprus, Canada, and various African countries as well. By the early years of the 21st century, there were over 500,000 people living in Britain who had arrived here from the Commonwealth countries which had subsequently been granted independence. 90% of them had regularised the situation by acquiring British passports and citizenship. Around 57,000 had not done so, although they must have known that it would be a good idea to do so, if only to be sure that their position was secure in this country. Some of these people had come here as children and never bothered to become British citizens. Whether this says something about their sense of identity, I don't know. Perhaps even after living here for so long, they still prefer to think of themselves as being Cypriot or Jamaican or whatever, rather than British. Those who had applied for passports never had any difficulty. I had friends in the 1980s who applied for passports for the first time, having been brought here as children from Jamaica in the 1950s, and their applications were dealt with as quickly and smoothly as anybody else's. Out of those 57,000 people from the colonies who had not bothered to get a passport or become naturalised citizens, about a quarter were Jamaican. But it is upon them that the focus has remained. Somehow the Cypriots and Canadians managed to sort things out in general without generating a scandal about the Cypriot generation or the Canadian generation. It had to become a black issue. Perhaps viewers did not know that Canadians were as much affected by the so-called Windrush scandal as people from the Caribbean. In the description to this video, I'll give a link to a newspaper article from 2018 about just such a person. As I say, the majority of those involved in this were not from the Caribbean. If you emigrate to another country, even as a child, it is only common sense to make sure that when you are an adult, you still have a right to live there. 90% of the people who arrived from the colonies between the passing of the British Nationality Act in 1948 and the 1971 Immigration Act realised this and took steps to ensure that they had the necessary documents to prove their right to be resident here. Some people from various countries never got round to doing so, and as a result they had difficulties in later life. I really do not see why this is the government's fault, and I certainly don't understand why it's called the Windrush scandal and not the Canada scandal.